Hi, this is Microdose U, and I'm Dr. Denise. I'm a doctor of psychology, and I got some really interesting questions this week. It came to me through Patreon and our Microdose U Patreon. And so I always encourage people, you'll hear me say, yeah, go and join Patreon because we can have a more direct conversation. Always you can respond to the podcast. I'll get that information as well. And so on Patreon, I got a couple of questions about physical health issues and what do we actually know about diseases and how microdosing psychedelics such as psilocybin and LSD are useful there. So I do want to always remind you that while this is not medical advice, I am here to give you some helpful information, summarize some of what we do know, and answer those questions. So the questions that I got this week, and it really spurred the entire episode today, were about Parkinson's. What do we really know about Parkinson's and the research when it comes to using psychedelics to help with that particular disease and illness process, stroke issues, Lyme disease, things of that nature, really physical health issues. And so that I wanted to come on and answer some of those questions. So thank you for bringing those topics up through the Patreon channel. So let's talk about what the actual current research shows and what studies show. And so the actual research, whether it's animal research or research with diseases and people, and then you'll always hear me talk about real world data, anecdotal research. What are people reporting? And so when I bring that up, I'm talking about lots of people. I'm not saying one person said this is helpful, although one person really matters. But when you have, say, 500 people saying, since I started microdosing, my arthritis is better. And that is actually how a lot of people say that we start to pay attention to that. So the research has basically shown, the current research, all of those areas have shown that microdosing psychedelics, in fact, helps the brain and the body adapt and recover to illnesses, diseases that may have caused damage in connections, in the way the body and the brain is wired. There's a decrease in the neurons, the cells in the brain and the body. There's maybe a dying off, poor functioning cells. And what's important in that is we never used to think we could repair that or stop that dying off decline. And we are finding that we can, and this is where microdosing psychedelics is particularly useful. So we have the dying off, we have the poor connections, we have damage to an area, we have inflammation, maladaptive signaling, rigid pathways that get stuck. And we see this in things like long COVID when the body is sort of just stuck in this is the way it's going to be now, is basically what the body starts doing. And what we're seeing with psychedelics is that we can stop that process and the psychedelics can work around that and say, no, that's the old pathway. It's actually not helpful. Here's the new pathway. And that's what we mean by neuroplasticity, rewiring, creating new pathways that are literally helping the physical symptoms and helping with some of these illnesses. So I wanted to answer the question about Parkinson's. So the question was, and thank you for that question. Does psychedelic, what is it really, the bottom line about Parkinson's, does this really help? So just a really quick point about Parkinson's. So Parkinson's is basically a dying off of cells and pathways, primarily affecting the dopamine there's like sort of the ripple effect with dopamine and serotonin. And what we know about psychedelics is it directly affects the serotonin. LSD affects the serotonin and a little bit more the dopamine. We always talk about that. So this is why psychedelics are helpful with Parkinson's. When you have a dying off of cells and pathways and you take medicines that can repair that, you're going to see improvement. So with dopamine, what we're seeing is that the dying of the neurons, basically, that are affecting that function create the tremors that we see with dopamine. We create the that sort of stiffness, rigidity, the maladaptive, even emotions, kind of apathy, depression. It really does stem from that dopamine system not functioning. So what the psychedelics are doing is they are rewiring and helping those dying off cells and the pathways, healing that. And so this is why we are seeing improvements with Parkinson's patients. So that is true. It is absolutely helping with motor skills and the tremors and that rigidity that we see in Parkinson's patients. Let's talk a little bit about strokes. The aspect of a stroke really is a decrease, some sort of injury, some decrease in oxygen to a part of your brain. Well, we know that that's a problem. And so there's literally a spot perhaps where it's not functioning. So what psychedelics are, what they're looking at in the research and what we're seeing with psychedelics is that it's healing and working around. The brain is very good at kind of taking over. If there's an injury, the brain can kind of say, all right, well, let's kind of take over and use this part of the brain for that function to a point. It can't just magically do that. And it's a massive stroke, obviously, that can not really happen sometimes. In patients that have strokes, what we're seeing is that the recovery from the stroke is enhanced by using psychedelics. And why is that? Because of that rewiring. Let's work around that part, decrease inflammation, work on increasing connectivity, rebuild other pathways around that part of the brain that was injured. And this is why they're showing improvements in stroke patients. Let's talk a little about the dementia decline, Alzheimer's cognitive decline.
So I literally just had one of our Patreon members send an audio recording in to me. And I know I talk about Patreon a lot because it's just an incredible community that we have here at Microdose U. But better than me talking about it is what Holly just sent me via audio. I'm going to play it for you because I think you really need to hear this. So let me go ahead and I'll listen along right with you.
I just wanted to say that I love Microdose U. My name's Holly. I've been a member of Patreon now for 6-7+ months, somewhere around there. And I've been microdosing myself for about 2.5, almost 3 years. And I really like Dr. Dave's style. And on a whim, I thought, you know what? It's only $12.50 a month. So why don't I just give this a whirl and see what it has in store? Really, I didn't have any expectations going into the Patreon group, but after being in the group for really a short period of time, it's really transformed everything for me. It's helped so much in my life and just making connections with others. We do have the live meetings and just getting to know others who may be in a similar boat, and a lot of us are. It has been very transforming. When I had joined, I think subconsciously, I was looking for some sort of community or at least a group of folks to chat about microdosing and psilocybin and life and all of that. And that was one of the other missing pieces in my life. I had mentioned to a few others, friends, maybe family about microdosing, but there was only a certain conversations we could have around that. And I really wasn't able to get into depth with friends and family about that. But with this group, it's another story, which is great. So we have a wonderful community, so much information, and even more than I had expected or even had hoped for. So I encourage you to look into it further. You never know what you don't know until you know, and just checking it out and seeing what it has to offer.
Holly, I want to thank you so much for your kind words. I'm truly humbled by what you said about our Patreon community there. And I'm going to recommend to anybody right now, listening or watching, now's your time. Now is truly the time to change your life. Don't wait another minute. The link is always in the show notes, and the link is always on my website, microdoseu.com. That's microdose with the letter U on the end of it, microdoseu.com, or right here in the show notes. Please join us because your life really will change. And that's not from me, that's from Holly.
Let's talk a little about the dementia decline, Alzheimer's cognitive decline. So what we're seeing with that decrease in memory and function and that declining brain cognitive process is that there is the communication in the brain, in the synapses, that's declining. So again, the psychedelics help that. So that's why we see improvements in Alzheimer's, in dementia, in cognitive decline. And it's really helping the body rewire and create better pathways and a stuck signaling pathway. And this is why it's so helpful with things like Alzheimer's and dementia. A little bit about arthritis. So arthritis, there's a lot of kinds of arthritis and everybody's different. I'm talking about primarily here inflammation, pain, that's from things not really signaling correctly, pathways being blocked. If you have inflammation, by the way, you are kind of creating a little bit of a clog in the system. So if you hurt your knee and you see some inflammation, first of all, it hurts a lot because there's not a lot of space in the knee joint, for example, and you'll take maybe an anti-inflammatory and that will feel a little bit better because the pressure is kind of off in that narrow space in the joint. What we know about psychedelics is they have that anti-inflammatory healing aspect and process. So this is why it helps things like arthritis and any sort of pain and inflammation, as well as inflammation we call it neuroinflammation. So anything that's brain, body physiology is going to also be helped. So we see a lot of those neuroinflammation diseases, like say post-Lyme, post-COVID, we see the brain fog clear up. We see that there's better sleep, that there's less physical pain in the body because of that anti-inflammation. Again, that rewiring, the signaling. I often think of the mushrooms in general, not just psychedelic mushrooms. If you've ever seen the information about how they bring nutrients to, say, in the forest, you've got like plants and trees that maybe aren't getting the nutrients that they need. And what the mushrooms do is they will network and bring nutrients to those various trees, plants, etc. It's like a communication system. It knows where to go. I mean, the wisdom. It's a really fascinating process. So that's what's happening in our body. Same exact kind of thing. If you've ever seen the mapping of the brain, spinal cord, and the entire nervous system, you'll see it looks very much like a tree with all the different limbs. And this is, we need the communication and the flow of oxygen and blood, et cetera, going through all of that. So if there's an injury and there's inflammation, the nutrients aren't getting there as much. The healing, the oxygen is not getting there to repair that. So what psychedelics do, again, is decrease that inflammation so things can flow. Also rewiring and bringing the information, the healing to those various injuries within our brain and our body, just like it does on the forest floor. So it's very complex. The science of it would probably bore me, and I don't want to bore you by going into all the detail of why that is. It's fascinating, and you can certainly message me and I can answer specifically about a particular illness or disease directly from watching this. Just comment on the video or go on Patreon and we can have a direct conversation about that. So I hope that helps. I hope that helps you look at some of those physical health issues. Thanks again for the great questions, and we'll see you soon.